Shalom. This week we are reading PARSHA Terumah, beginning in chapter 25 of the book of Exodus. Egypt is now behind us. It's time to get down to business. It's time to cut to the chase. And God says essentially, we've been through enough together. Why don't we settle down? After all, he says, I created the world for a purpose so that you should know who I am. And maybe if you're focused on me all the time, you won't get involved in such nonsense. So Israel is commanded to erect the tabernacle in the middle of the desert. It's a spiritual oasis in the midst of a very foreboding emptiness. Later, the tabernacle becomes the holy temple and becomes a spiritual oasis in the midst of the dry desert that is this whole world. But whether we're talking about the temporary tabernacle or the permanent temple on Mount Moriah, the message is the same. Israel has a job to do, a calling, a mission, and that is to bring the light of the divine presence into this world by making a house for God's sake, by welcoming Him in, by welcoming Him home. And the sheer iconography of Israel traveling through the desert with all her tribes surrounding the tabernacle, arranged in that fashion, is a profound statement to a skeptical, cynical, self-serving world. Israel is calling out, hello, there's a God in the world. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about Him. And so God clearly commands us to build the temple in this parsha, and He says, and they shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. And this word that He uses, li, va'asu li mikdash, they shall make for me a sanctuary. Rashi explains, lishmi, this means for my sake, for my name's sake. And this is a very unique obligation that the Jewish people have to build the temple. And we find that there are different reactions to this obligation. Our sages, for example, teach us that Moshe Rabbeinu himself, Moses, when he initially heard this commandment uttered by the mouth of the Almighty, he nearly fainted. And he said, but the heavens and the heavens of heavens cannot possibly contain you. And yet you say, they shall make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell among them? And the Midrash continues and tells us that Hashem said, Moshe, you're mistaken. Whoa, you're totally off. All that it takes is 20 beams on the north side, 20 beams on the south side, and 8 beams on the west side, a reference to the tabernacle, and I will come down and abide my presence, my glory among you. As if God is saying, this is not rocket science. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for man. I'm looking for you. And then the Midrash teaches us that there is the reaction of the angels. They were very zealous. They were very indignant. How can you do this? They said to God. How can you allow your glory to abide amongst men who are but dust? But the Zohar states that God gave this commandment to Israel when they circumcised themselves. And this tradition is making a connection between the concept of circumcision and the concept of the building of the temple, which makes for God's dwelling amongst His people. And this is exactly the answer that God gave to the angels. God says, if I wanted man to be perfect, I would have created him perfectly. I would have made sure that he was born perfect. But I want him to work towards rectifying himself, towards fixing his own human nature, which of course is exactly what the circumcision symbolizes. And so God essentially declared to the angels, this is the world that I want to be in. And then of course there are people today who say, what? Who are we to build a temple? It's not time. We're not ready. We're not pure enough. And there are those who say, who needs it altogether? That was then. This is now. We're not in the dark ages anymore. We don't need that. We have iPhones. And it's not relevant. But to both of these, God says, and you shall make for me a sanctuary. As Rashi says, li, lishmi, for my name's sake. As if to say, I didn't ask you. This is not a question of your opinion. It's not about you and it's not for you. It's for me. Is that okay? Do you mind doing something for me? And the Midrash states, when Israel stood before him at Sinai, he told them, there's only one reason I delivered you out of Egypt, in order for you to erect for me a tabernacle so that my presence will dwell among you. What a promise. They shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. The temple is God's plan for the model of a perfect world in the midst of all the turmoil.